Which World War I movie gets it right? Today, I'm ranking the most historically accurate World War I films ever made, starting with a movie that used real trench maps and authentic uniforms, and ending with a film where modern technology literally brings century-old soldiers back to life. Beneath Hill 60 doesn't go for the big, usual war movie action. Instead, it drops you right into the tunnels under World War I, where Australian miners and engineers are basically living in the dirt. The movie follows Oliver Woodward, the officer in charge of a crew digging under German lines to set explosives, just crawling through dark, tight spaces, hoping the next crack in the wall isn't the end. This is the side of the war nobody talks about. Guys down there are just trying to stay alive, breathing in dust, always on edge for cave-ins or hearing the enemy digging on the other side. The tension is brutal, and you start to get why some of these men barely made it out with their minds intact. The big moment when they finally blow up the tunnels under Hill 60 lands hard. It's not a victory lap, it's just another reminder of how ugly and relentless the whole thing was. This is trench warfare turned inside out. Legends of the Fall is set in early 20th century Montana, right as World War I changes everything for the Ludlow family. The story is about three brothers, Alfred, Tristan, and Samuel, who grow up close, isolated from the world until the war pulls them in. The film actually shows what fighting in World War I looked like: brutal trench warfare, senseless violence, and the kind of trauma soldiers brought home with them. Samuel dies in the trenches, and that loss destroys whatever peace the family had left. Tristan comes back haunted by everything he saw, and nothing feels right for him again. Even Alfred changes. The rest of the movie is about the aftermath, the way war breaks people and families, not just the men who fought, but everyone left behind. Legends of the Fall doesn't just use the war as a setting, it's the thing that breaks the Ludlows, and it shows how World War I did the same to families everywhere, whether they were on the battlefield or waiting at home. Spielberg's War Horse puts you right into World War I, but he does it in a way most war films don't, through a horse. Joey starts out on a farm, but once the war starts, he's pulled into everything. The movie doesn't cut corners on how things looked or felt in that era. Every uniform, every gun, every trench, every muddy field is exactly how it would have been in 1914. You see the shift from old-school cavalry charges to modern warfare. Horses and riders running straight into machine guns and barbed wire because military leaders hadn't caught up with the new weapons. You see soldiers on both sides exhausted, starving, and barely surviving, along with the animals that get dragged through the same hell. One of the best moments in the film is when Joey gets trapped in barbed wire in no man's land. Everything stops for a second and two enemy soldiers, one German and one British, crawl out under fire just to set the horse free. You see the war's brutality everywhere: shelling, chemical attacks, mud, and endless death. But you also see those rare flashes of humanity even between enemies. This one stands out from every other World War I film because it skips the trenches and focuses on what happens after, the prisoners' camps. Jean Renoir tells the story through a group of captured French officers, each from a totally different social background. You've got Captain de Bouldieu, the aristocrat, Lieutenant Maréchal, working class, and Rosenthal, who's Jewish and wealthy. The war might have thrown them together, but the movie is all about how those old class divisions and prejudices don't disappear, even when everyone's locked up facing the same fate. Renoir gets the details right. Strict routines in the camps, escape attempts based on real prisoner accounts, all the small daily things that start to break people down mentally. There aren't any big battle scenes. Instead, it's about what war does to people over time, how they bond, how they clash, how their ideas about honor or chivalry just get eroded by reality. The relationship between de Bouldieu and his German counterpart, von Rauffenstein, shows a dying world where the old aristocratic code still means something even as modern war wipes it all out. Lawrence of Arabia is still the gold standard for World War I epics. David Lean goes all in on scale, but he stays grounded in real history. The film follows T.E. Lawrence as he gets thrown into the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. There's the military strategy, desert warfare, hit-and-run raids, blowing up railways, and the backroom politics between British commanders and Arab leaders. Lean doesn't skip over the ugly parts. The British manipulating the Arabs, the shifting alliances, the whole colonial agenda in the background. Even though there's some creative license, the film is honest about how complicated and ruthless the politics got. Peter O'Toole's Lawrence is a mess of contradictions. He wants to be a hero, but he's driven by ego, and half the time he doesn't know which side he's really on. The story keeps him right in the middle of real events, not as a legend, but as a flawed person making impossible choices. The film's attention to military detail and the way it actually gets the history right is why it still holds up. Kubrick's Paths of Glory is one of the sharpest movies ever made about the corruption and hypocrisy inside the military during World War I. The story centers on Colonel Dex, played by Kirk Douglas, who tries to save his men from being executed after they refuse to carry out a suicide mission. The trench scenes are some of the most realistic ever filmed, cramped, filthy, and loaded with tension. They even filmed in stark black and white to make every moment feel even harsher. You see the gap between the soldiers who are stuck suffering on the front lines and the officers who make all the decisions from the comfort of their chateaus, totally disconnected from what's really happening. The court-martial in the movie isn't just for show, it lays out exactly how corrupt and self-serving the chain of command could be, punishing its own men to cover up their own failures. Paths of Glory is a direct shot at the entire system that allowed this kind of injustice to happen, and it's all built on the real history of how World War I was actually fought and commanded. Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old is a game-changer for World War I documentaries. He takes original film footage from the trenches, grainy black and white, 100 years old, and completely restores it. The colorization, frame rate fixes, and new sound design make the war feel immediate and real, as if it's happening right now, not just something from the history books. But it's the voices that set this film apart. Everything you hear comes from real interviews with British veterans who were there. There's no script, no actors, just the soldiers telling their own stories. Fear, exhaustion, small moments of humor, everything they went through day after day. Jackson doesn't add anything extra. The point is to let the people who lived through it finally be heard. They Shall Not Grow Old isn't just a documentary. It's a chance to see and hear World War I exactly as those men experienced it, with every detail restored and nothing between them and the viewer. Edward Berger's All Quiet on the Western Front is probably the most honest World War I film in decades. The story drops you right in the mud, alongside Felix Kammerer's Paul, a young German recruit who starts the war with hope and ends it with nothing. The movie never looks away from the reality, endless trench combat, exhaustion, fear, and the pointlessness of it all. You see every detail, the ruined landscapes, the dead and wounded, the way soldiers get chewed up by the machinery of war. This adaptation adds something new. While Paul and his friends fight and die in the dirt, the film also cuts to the armistice negotiations, where politicians and generals sign papers in clean, quiet rooms. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Everything about the film, costumes, weapons, uniforms, the sounds of artillery, feels historically exact. It's not just about the fighting, it's about how the war destroys the people in it, and how the decisions that end it are made far from the trenches. 1917 is all about immersion. Sam Mendes doesn't just show World War I, he drags you through it in real time, following two British soldiers sent to deliver a message that could save hundreds of lives. The whole movie looks like a single unbroken shot with the camera locked on these two men as they crawl through mud, wire, bombed-out houses, and chaos. There's nowhere to hide, and the tension never lets up. The technical side gets most of the attention, but what stands out is how real everything feels. The trenches, the equipment, the ruined landscapes, they're all exactly as they would have been in 1917. Mendes makes it clear just how unpredictable and relentless the war was, physically and mentally. It's one of the best films for showing what it actually looked and felt like to fight in World War I. Lewis Milestone's 1930 version of All Quiet on the Western Front set the standard for every war film that followed. It sticks close to Remarque's novel. Young German recruits full of patriotic hopes sent straight into the horror of trench warfare. The film's authenticity is still striking. Realistic battle scenes, the dirt and blood, the way Paul Bäumer goes from excited kid to someone who's just trying to survive. There's no romanticizing here. The psychological toll is front and center. The film's anti-war message was strong enough that some governments banned it outright. Even almost a century later, this version is still considered one of the most accurate, historically honest looks at what World War I actually did to a generation.